Hey everyone, it is Tim here, and I'm coming to you from the Chilean island of Chiloé, where I am coming to the end at the moment of 2 magical days that I've spent touring the island. Come with me. Hey everyone, I'm Tim, and I've just finished a 9-month odyssey around Latin America. Now I'm reopening my diaries, and this time I'm bringing you along with me. Week by week, country by country, all the colors, all the craziness, all the food, all the music, and all the splendor. 9 months when each morning was a new adventure. The road was my companion, and Latin America cast its spell on me. This is my Latin America Diaries. Welcome back to Latin America Diaries. I left beautiful Pucón and by bus headed further south in Chile towards the lakeside town of Frutillar, where I was met at the highway bus stop by my friend Achao. He picked me up and took me to the hostel in the middle of town where I would be staying. I was going to be seeing him the next day, but he did give me one bit of advice, and that was, before we meet up tomorrow morning, make sure that you get down to the lake early morning. And that's exactly what I did. I checked into the hostel Almas, and then first thing the next morning, I headed straight down towards Lake Janquihue. The town, in the crisp mid-autumn air, was just beginning to wake up, and something about it felt strangely familiar. It reminded me somehow of some of the road trips that I did with my family when I was younger to the New England region of New South Wales in Australia. The same sort of quiet country roads, cool morning air, and that same stillness. Down by the lake, everything was calm, still and serene. This town was built in part by a German community that moved here years ago, and the houses and gardens still echo a certain Germanic quality. It had this gentle, almost storybook quality to it, pristine, peaceful, and completely unhurried. And although I don't usually love places that feel deserted, this didn't feel eerie at all. It felt comforting. I found a small cafe that had just opened for the morning, and I grabbed a coffee and took it back down to the water and just sat there and took it all in. Across the lake, although I couldn't see it that morning because of the clouds, sits Volcán Osorno, one of the most perfectly conical shaped volcanoes I've ever seen. I'd been told that the view from here is incredible, but that would have to wait. After a while, I wandered back up through town and stopped in at a small supermarket where I picked up a Kuchen, which is a traditional German-style cake that's hugely popular in this part of Chile, reflecting the region's strong German heritage. Cake in hand, I headed out towards Nacho's place on the outskirts of town in the countryside, and it was out there with him and his friends that we celebrated my 40th birthday Southern Chile edition, surrounded by forest, blackberry bushes, and the quiet beauty of Southern Chile's Lake District. If you're enjoying this video so far, consider giving it a like and make sure that you subscribe to my channel for updates whenever I upload new videos from this series. And if you're really enjoying what you're seeing, please share it on your social media and tell your family and friends about it. It really helps me grow this YouTube channel. That afternoon, Nacho, his friends, and I all headed back down towards the lake, and as we were approaching the lake in the car, there it was. Through the clouds, rising above the horizon in all its glory, was Volcán Osorno. There were still clouds swirling around it, but wow, it was magnificent. What had felt calm and serene that morning was now transformed into something completely different. This perfectly shaped giant rose up across the lake, imposing and almost intimidating, absolutely spectacular. That evening, we all went out for drinks and dinner at a bar down by the lake, and then the next morning it was time to bid farewell to Nacho and the gang and Frutillar and head even further south. I took a bus to Puerto Montt, the main city of the region, where I had arranged to hire a car. This time I came prepared. I had my credit card in hand and I had a backup one as well, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to have a repeat of what happened in Pucón. And I got there and walked up to the desk very confidently, where I was told that I would not be able to hire the car using a credit card that was issued outside of Chile. I was given 2 options: locate a Chilean credit card somewhere that I would be able to use, or pay in cash. so paying cash I did. I visited an airport ATM, paid a small fortune in fees and charges for withdrawing that much cash, handed it over, and that was securely locked in a box I saw, and then I was given the keys to my car, which would take me around the region for the next 3 days. My first stop was back along Lake Janquihue in the town of Puerto Varas, the region's main tourist hub. From here you get uninterrupted views of Volcán Osorno, but from a completely different angle. This time, instead of looking foreboding, it looked almost regal, snow-capped, perfectly shaped, and framed by softer clouds. Driving in Chile, by the way, was pretty easy. I had been warned that it might be a bit difficult, but I thought it was completely fine. As for Puerto Varas, I liked it, but compared to Frutillar, it felt bigger and more developed and a bit less quaint. From there, I continued even further east, out toward Lake Todos los Santos, deep on the edge of a national park. And here, the feeling changed again. Frutillar had been the quaint lakeside village. Puerto Varas was the tourist hub, but this was wilderness. Once again, quiet, remote, and untouched. And all the while, Volcán Osorno loomed in the background. The drive back from Petrohue, which is the small village on the shores of Lake Todos los Santos, that drive back was equally spectacular. Clouds were swirling dramatically around Osorno, and also around Volcán Calbuco, another giant of the region. It was eerie and beautiful. But that wasn't even my final destination for the day. I was headed somewhere else entirely. From Petrohue, I headed back towards Puerto Montt, but then continued past Puerto Montt on the motorway towards the town of Pargua, where I lined up in the car for the vehicular ferry. I drove onto the boat, the ramp lifted, and we set off across the water. The crossing was short, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, calm and quiet as the mainland slowly drifted away behind us. We arrived on the other side at Chacao, the gateway to one of Chile's most unique regions. From there, I drove south, first through the fading light of sunset and then into the darkness, until I finally reached the town of Del Cahue. And this is where I would spend my first night on the enchanting island of Chiloé. Chiloé is the kind of place that feels like it should only exist in imagination, not in reality. If I told you that there was a place on Earth where spirits and fairies were said to live among winding blackberry vines, dense forests, and weathered wooden cabins, this is where it would be. Chiloé has an incredibly rich folklore, a tapestry of myths, legends, and traditions that feels almost otherworldly. Some of these beliefs are thought to trace back to ancient connections with Pacific island cultures, evolving over time into something uniquely its own, a darker, colder, more southerly version of myth and magic. For centuries, the island was isolated from the mainland, allowing the culture to develop into something else entirely. And then with Spanish colonization, Catholicism added another layer over the top of that. And all of these cultures blend together to create something really, really unique. It's an intoxicating mix. It's dark, but it's bewitching. However, Chiloé's isolation may soon be coming to an end because right now a bridge is under construction between Pargua and Chacao, a project that will, for the first time, permanently link the island to mainland Chile, replacing the ferry crossing that I took to get here. And it's not just an infrastructure project, it's part of a much bigger conversation. Because while greater connectivity promises opportunity, growth, and development, there's also a very real question about what might be lost along the way. In a place like Chiloé, where tradition, folklore, and a slower way of life are so deeply woven into everyday existence, the arrival of that bridge represents not just connection, but change. While southern Chile is truly spectacular, Chiloé feels different. Instead, it's the kind of place that really gets under your skin. From the moment I arrived, I knew that I'd made the right decision to come here and to spend a full 3 days exploring it. In fact, I could easily have stayed longer. Visiting Chiloé requires a little bit of planning because things work a bit differently here. First, public transport is quite thin on the ground, so it's almost essential that you have a car at your disposal to move around. Secondly, although there are hotels on the island, most people end up staying in hospedajes, which are family-run guest houses, which are Sort of like bed and breakfast, but they're more in the tradition of travelers' inns that have dotted the island and been the place where travelers and visitors to Chiloé would stay on the island since time immemorial. On my first night on the island, I stayed at the Hospedaje Isla Talcan in Delcajue, which is one of the main towns on the island. That night I arrived late and I was pretty hungry, so I headed out to look for something to eat. There were a couple of places open, even by the time I got in. That was fairly late, but it was pouring with rain and nothing really appealed actually. But then I took a walk down a side street and I came across this small food truck where a lady had set up her own business and was selling completos, which is Chile's famous loaded hot dogs. A completo is not subtle. It's a hot dog piled high with diced tomato, avocado and mayonnaise, and it's usually made with pork, but she was also selling vegan versions. So that became dinner, and I stood there under the awning of the truck taking shelter from the rain and chatting with her and having not one of the most healthiest meals of my life, but definitely one of the most memorable. But Chiloé isn't really about the towns. To understand it, to really get it, you need to get out into the landscape. Now, while Chiloé is one large island, there are many smaller islands just off the coast of the main one, and from Delcajue it's just a short vehicular ferry ride, about 5 minutes, to the island of Cucao, which is home to the town of Achao. One of the defining features of Chiloé is its churches. These aren't just places of worship, they're expressions of culture in architecture. Built almost entirely from local timber, they reflect a distinctive architectural style found nowhere else in the world, blending European religious design with local materials, colors, and cultural influences. Most of them are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and they feel different. It's almost as if the island's beliefs and myths and secrets have seeped into the walls of these churches. You feel it as you walk into them. My first stop was one of these churches, but when I arrived it was closed. So instead I found myself standing at the edge of a paddock looking out over the surrounding inlets, quiet yet windswept. And in that moment, I felt like Chiloé was beginning to reveal itself. This part of the trip was absolutely gorgeous. Every time I stopped the car, every twist and turn of the road, it felt like I was driving through a painting. Like a Jackson Pollock, but softer, wilder, more alive. And this really speaks to the essence of Chiloé Island. It feels really alone, but not lonely. Or there's a beauty in the loneliness or something. I can't quite describe it. There's like an introspection. It's really magical. A kind of quiet that doesn't feel empty, somehow feels really full. There's a real beauty in it. I continued driving and stopped in the small port town of Curaçao de Vélez, where I wandered around and took in more of the local architecture, simple, wooden, weathered, and full of character. And from there, I carried on to the main town on the island, Achao. Now, Achao is famous for its church, the Iglesia de Achao. And yes, I know that I'm making a big deal about the churches here, but they really are a big deal. It's not just what they look like, but it's what they represent, this unique fusion of Catholic tradition, indigenous myth, folklore, and local belief systems. And around Achao, I also noticed something else, and that is houses built on stilts. Now, this is another defining feature of Chiloé, and it ties back to something even more fascinating. It's the belief that the land itself can be inhabited by spirits. Because of this, many traditional houses aren't built with foundations, or at least not permanent foundations. Instead, they're constructed so they can be moved, literally lifted, transported, and relocated if needed. And historically, this did happen, and occasionally nowadays it still does. If a family experienced a run of bad luck, it might be taken as a sign that the land was cursed and the house would be moved elsewhere. And once you know that, it changes your perception of everything, even the land that you're standing on. From there, I headed back across the island towards the main island and continued onwards to Tenaún, a small village on a peninsula facing back towards Cucao Island. Tenaún felt timeless. Fruit trees scattered around homes, wooden houses built in that same demountable style, walls made from overlapping timber shingles weathered by wind and rain, and then at the heart of it all, the Iglesia de Tenaún, painted in soft but striking colors and standing quietly against the blue sky above. Inside, the craftsmanship was incredible. Everything was made of wood, the beams, the ceilings, the walls. Simple wooden chairs lined the sides of the church. A handcrafted wooden confessional sat tucked away in a corner. It felt humble but deeply intentional. And outside, this tree, twisted and ancient looking. The kind of tree that feels like it belongs in a story. If you're going to believe that spirits or fairies live anywhere on Earth, this would be the place. And then I hit the road again, heading further south. This landscape, it's hard to describe. It's bleak and windswept, grey and exposed, but at the same time it feels alive, colourful, raw and invigorating. I've never really been one to be drawn to places like this, you know, the cold wilderness of Tasmania or New Zealand, the north of Scandinavia or Russia. It's never really been my thing. I've been more of a hot weather person, but this felt different. There was something really magical about it. I eventually pulled into the largest town on Chiloé, which is called Castro. Castro meaning castle in Spanish. It's a town built right on the edge of the water, famous for its palafitos. These brightly coloured houses on stilts that extend out over the sea. They're one of the defining visual symbols of Chiloé, and in many ways they reflect something deeper in the island's identity, this constant negotiation between land, water, and the unseen world that sits beyond both. I checked into the Palafito Waiwen Hostel, a warm, wooden, log cabin-style building perched directly above the water. It was simple but incredibly cozy. Exactly what you want in a place where the wind and the rain seem never too far away. That evening I headed into the town centre of Castro for a bite to eat, before stumbling across the Iglesia de San Francisco de Castro. Although the exterior of it looked more like a traditional Latin American cathedral, the interior was once again replete with wood. Inside, it feels almost like being inside an old ship. Timber beams curve overhead and the walls are lined with carved wood. Everything feels both humble and a representation of the environment. It's quite remarkable how such basic and raw construction materials can create something that feels so atmospheric. The next morning before dawn, I woke up early and hit the road, and I was already driving when the sun began to rise, breaking through a low-hanging sheet of cloud that sat heavy over the island. It wasn't a sunrise that cleared the fog, it was one that revealed it. And in Chiloé, you begin to realize that the clouds aren't just weather here, but they set the tone for everything. I was heading out towards the eastern side of the island, the town of Cucao, along narrow, remote roads that cut through farmland and forest. Horses and cattle wandered through the morning mist. Wooden fences leaned slightly with age. Houses that were half swallowed by moss, as though the forest was slowly reclaiming them. Eventually the road began to trace the edge of Lake Wijinko, where wooden jetties stretched out into the still dark water that reflected nothing but sky and fog. It felt like the land was dissolving into silence. And then finally I reached the Pacific coast, and that felt different yet again. Vast, flat, and exposed. The ocean here doesn't rise dramatically so much as it arrives quietly, rolling in under a thick layer of sea mist that moves almost at ground level. You can see the horizon, but everything below it feels blurred and softened and almost erased. It's raw in a way that's hard to describe, like the world has been stripped back to its most essential elements: water, wind, and silence. And it's here that Chiloé's old folk tales feel especially pertinent. In local mythology, the ocean is not just water, it is inhabited. One of the most well-known figures is La Pincoya, a sea spirit who emerges from the waves and dances on the shore. She determines the fate of fishermen. If she dances facing the sea, it brings abundance and a good catch. If she dances towards the land, it signals scarcity and hardship. There are also stories of Caleuche, a ghost ship said to sail these waters at night, appearing through the fog with music and light, crewed by the spirits of the drowned. It's said to drift between worlds, neither fully alive nor fully gone. Standing there with the mist rolling in and the ocean stretching into nothingness, these stories don't feel like fantasy. They feel like explanations for something that is otherwise too vast, too quiet, and too unknowable to describe in any other way. Around here is the Muelle de las Almas, the Pier of the Souls. It's one of the island's most famous landmarks, designed as a kind of symbolic walkway towards the sea and the unknown beyond it. But when I arrived, it was unfortunately closed. So instead, I pushed further along the coastline and out into the more remote corners of this part of the island. I explored more of the rugged shore near Cucao and eventually reached Playa Cucao, which felt like one of the most remote and windswept parts of the entire journey so far. Just marsh, ocean, and wind. From there, I turned back inland, starting to retrace my steps back towards Castro. I stopped briefly at the small village of Nercón, home to yet another of Chiloé's iconic wooden churches, the Iglesia Nercón, which dates back to the 19th century. It's part of a broader wave of wooden church construction led by Jesuit and Franciscan missionaries, who built these structures using the local timber and traditional Chilote craftsmanship. Like the others, it reflects that unique fusion of Catholic influence and indigenous materials and sensibilities that defines the island's architectural identity. From Nercón, I headed north to almost the top of the island and the town of Ancud, which is another one of the large towns on the island, and it would be my final stop on the island. There, I checked into the Hospedaje Esencia Chilota. I tried to find one of Chiloé's traditional feasts for which it's famous, the curanto. It's cooked underground with hot stones, seafood, meat, and potatoes layered in a pit in the earth. It's one of the island's most iconic culinary traditions, but unfortunately, I couldn't find anywhere serving it that evening. So instead, I headed up to a hilltop lookout, the Mirador Cerro Huihuen in Ancud, and sat there with a book that I'd been given by a dear Chilean friend of mine for my birthday. From that windy vantage point, I looked out over the coastline, watching the light fade over the sea and the land thinning out into water and mist. And that, right there, felt like the perfect way to end my time in Chiloé. Chiloé is the kind of place that doesn't really leave you when you leave Chiloé. You know, it stays with you in the weather and in the silence, and that sort of sense that there's always something lurking just beyond the surface of everything that you interact with. If you ever have a chance to travel to this part of Chile, I can't recommend Chiloé highly enough. I was there for 3 days and I could have spent longer, and so really I would highly recommend dedicating a bit of time to visiting Chiloé, because it will be an experience that you will not forget for a very long time. In the next episode, I head even further south into a different Chile, one that feels less folkloric but is even more spectacular. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to my channel, and I'll see you then.